Can't hear me, huh? I'm usually very loud, even without a microphone. So my name is Mary Frantz, and in full disclosure, I had a PowerPoint presentation that got wiped by some attorneys down to bare minimum, simply because I testify a lot. So we're going to talk off the cuff here, and I just have a few keywords that I can't mention, so that's about it. But what we're going to talk about today are the attacks you don't see in the news, the ones that aren't reported, and what really happens behind the ones that are reported. Okay? So I've been in this industry for over 30 years, and I've seen a lot. And I can tell you point blank that 67% of all the incidences that we cover, from mom and pop stores to Fortune 10, are not reported. You will never see them in the news. Most of them never even tell them to law enforcement until they absolutely have to. And what we see going on behind what you see in the news and what you actually see in the lawsuits that I personally and several of my colleagues at my firm get called in to testify for is only usually the symptom of the incident that occurred, not necessarily the whole story. Now, with all due respect to counsel in my firm, as well as counsel that I work with on a regular basis, one of the reasons why you never see this is internal counsel, external counsel, and nobody telling internal or external counsel what's actually going on in the organization. And we have been involved in lots of different events. So a little bit about me. Like I said, I started working my first incident a long time ago, which I didn't even know was an incident, which is an investigation to an insider trading scheme when I was an intern working at the Chicago Bar Association, and I volunteered for free to look through COBOL code written by EDS that was used at the Chicago Board of Exchange. And the FBI agents, the SEC, everybody, all the attorneys involved didn't know anything about technology, didn't know anything about code at all. And so here I am with a slew of green bar sheet perforated edges looking through COBOL code and realizing very, very quickly that the code was not damaged. It was people manipulating the way the systems work. And that's pretty much what the theme is for all the incidences that we go through. Yes, some of them can be fairly sophisticated once they break in, and they want to be very stealthy. For the most part, almost every incident we've dealt with, from ransomware down to internal espionage, has been somebody literally walking through the front door. And then depending on whether they want to be a bull in a china shop, or depending on whether they want to slowly exfiltrate information and be quite stealthy, that's where the sophistication comes in. But the sophistication comes in through psychology, understanding the customer, and understanding the environment and what their objective is. It's not necessarily from the code. And that's really important to remember, because as I was telling somebody earlier, anybody can learn to code, and you can always hire a coder. It's what you're using it for, what you want to do, and how you want to be portrayed. If you're financially motivated, if you're IP motivated, and then you sell the access into the organization, or you give the credential to the web shell that you put on their site, that sort of thing, in order to embarrass, in order to make more money, in order to hide your tracks. So I'm going to start off with the top 5 that you do not see and are very rarely reported for real ever. And the first one is ransomware. And people think, well, ransomware, of course, you see it on a leak site. They're ransomed. Of course they have to report, because everything's shut down, and of course employees talk. It's really hard to keep that secret. But believe it or not, a lot of ransomware that comes in a RaaS format and bricks the system is not extorted. And in the past year and a half, we went back and counted how many were not extorted. And unlike the DOJ that released that 1 out of 7 is not reported, we would say more it's like 4 or 5 out of 7. And there's 3 reasons why ransomware is easy not to report, is because A, and we're seeing this more and more often, and it's been going on, it's just been really hard to get to it, and I'll tell you why in a little bit. It's been really, is because there really isn't an extortion. Somebody finds that all their systems are bricked, or somebody finds that a key application or something like that starts to go down. There's no ransom note, and if there is a ransom note, it's a fake one. For instance, we ran across one a couple months ago, and I'm going to change the names on this a little bit, but the picture on the ransom was of Putin. The link was, you could find that by Googling the link to actually pay and for the note. So it was somebody who just took it and needed something to put on there. And as we did the investigation, what we found is that this organization had been hacked, which is typical of ransomware, 3, 6, 7 months, and this one over 2 years beforehand, when we grabbed all the backups, snapshots, images, old servers that had not yet been cleaned, and we found the initial IOC, and several of them had come 2 years earlier through the MSP that they were using and an insider within the MSP. And what gave them away in this case was they used a browser we only usually see in China. So what was the motivation? Why brick it now? And when we did our threat intel, and we're seeing this again way more often, is that more advanced APTs, nation states, initial access brokers, are paying ransomware groups, and a lot of times people who claim to be part of a ransomware group, to help hide their tracks. What better way than to grab a crypto locker of some sort, we found a cool one the other day, and just lock everything and go into that organization like a bull in the china shop and step on everything, eliminate evidence, and they already were paid. So there's no extortion. Lawyers get a hold of that, there's no extortion, there's no leak site. We don't have to report, we have no evidence of exfiltration. Because a legal version of exfiltration and damages that require them to report to state statutes means that they have to have physical evidence. Well, when you had misconfigured a firewall anyways, which a lot of people have, you're not going to see that flying across there if you have no logs on the firewall, if somebody already got in there and wiped them, right? You're not going to see a lot. They're not going to have a staging area like we used to see in between 2016 and 2019. You're just not going to see that anymore. And I would tell you that 3 out of the 5 so-called ransomwares that we have come across were from ransomware groups that were paid, and fake names. A lot of them aren't even with Medusa or Lockbit or anything like that, okay? Or even the new one, No Name. They're not even with that group. They just grabbed an image that was found online, pretended to be that. They were already paid handsomely to go in there and wipe it as much as they can. Now, when you think about ransomware in general, those guys move really, really quickly. Really quickly. Sometimes within hours or days, in really large environments. So, how do they get that information? How do they know how to traverse the network so quickly? That's usually because another IAB or access broker, more sophisticated attacker, had already gone in and pillaged the organization. So how many of you here, by the way, have been involved in your own organizations or someone you know, because I don't want you to give away anything, where you know that something's happened and it wasn't reported and probably something was taken or something should have been reported? Nobody wants to raise their hands. Okay, I get it. We see it, like I said, a lot, and ransomware and that covering of the tracks is our first clue. But what we also see not reported is when your SOC team, your MSP, or somebody else sees something that's going on, and they've too long said it was a false positive, and then all of a sudden, something shows up where they get notified by somebody saying, hey, your customers, your employees, your data, your IP is now being sold, or we found it, okay? And these threat researchers are not going online, or the FBI contacts them and sees it. They take it internally, they talk to counsel, and the first thing they do is go through every statute and every regulation and say, do we absolutely have to report this? And about 8 out of 10 times it's no. So we've been involved in very, very large Fortune 100 and higher organizations where they have been actually, when we look back, when they finally had something that really tripped them where they needed to bring in an expert, we look back and we see you were hacked here, 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 and here, and now you got so many backdoors in this organization, it's gonna be really hard to shut everything down and clean it up. But now we start to isolate, we start to contain, we start to image everything that we can. Matter of fact, we actually saw one where they were coming in and modifying the master gold image that IT was using in order to flash all the machines. That's not uncommon, and they were coming from a third party that was helping, that was already pre-flashing some of it and sending it through. And I'm seeing some shaking heads here, so you've seen that too. Those things are not reported. Okay? Another thing that's not reported is wire fraud. How many of you have heard or know somebody that's been a victim of wire fraud? Does everyone know what wire fraud is? Are we awake? Okay. So, wire fraud, anybody? Okay. Pardon me? Right. So, we saw a huge uptick that nobody likes to talk about in wire fraud when the Ukraine-Russia war started. Now, we saw it beforehand. It's been a common tactic of phishing for a while, but we saw a huge uptick that was not reported, and I can't find it anywhere in the news, and we were handling it. We worked with Secret Service, FBI, and a few others, because they were kind of unusual. They were going through RESPA closing portals for real estate and luxury yacht title closing companies. Can anybody guess why and how this started? Anybody? Okay, so we traced a lot of them all the way back to Belarus, Moldova, Russia. So a lot of these oligarchs that were having their properties confiscated and their yachts confiscated wanted their money back. So they hired hackers. And they did it quite loudly. I mean, these were, hey, you can work from home. Hey, work for me, that sort of thing. And they hired actual hacking groups. And some of the more popular ones that you see were doing side jobs for these guys. They were breaking into the portals, which is pretty easy to do because a lot of these are not built and housed in the United States. Matter of fact, the majority of them that we saw that were being attacked were in India, Dublin, and Spain. Breaking into the back door, so you're ready, you've already submitted all your financial information, and you get an email that from the portal, from your broker, from your closer, from the billing department, from the bank or whatever, from the portal, that basically said, okay, we're ready, all your paperwork's done, you need to wire the remaining balance before we transfer title and you receive your yacht, you receive your luxury car, or you get your new luxury home in Vail. So they were sending their money to another account. And then 2 or 3 days later, they said it would take a while for it to clear, usually overnight, because these things go in batches, right? And then the person was calling and saying, hey, I haven't heard anything back. And if they emailed the same person that gave them the fake bank account and routing number and name, they would get, oh yeah, we received it, you're good. Stuff should be coming any day, to buy them some time. If they called them, they're going, we never got the money. So then they start to look, well, guess what? The money's gone. So here's what happens in these types of environments. When you want to open a consumer account, you have to walk into a bank and almost give blood, right? Bring your credit card, bring a utility bill, bring a driver's license. If you're opening it for your kid, you better have everything else ready too. Got to sit down at the table and open up a bank account, right? But if I steal your data, pretend I'm you, go to the state Secretary of State's office, open an LLC, matter of fact, more than one. I just grab your data off of any market that I can find because it's been stolen already. I can open up a business bank account online in most states. I can open up an LLC or sole proprietorship through the Secretary of State's office online in most states. Now we have reporting mechanisms when money goes out of the country, right? Well, you've got to catch it within the 48 or 72 hours it leaves the country. So, this is how every single one of these schemes worked. I stole data. I opened up LLCs in different banks in different states in the United States. I hired hackers. They went in and broke into these portals, which had virtually, if you looked at any of the standards, all of them kind of passed, but nothing really in spirit, because a lot of them didn't have MFA on them and a few other things, so they're pretty easy to break into. The Chicago Torrens system, not one of my matters. Heard about that one. That was announced. They did get broken into, so for large real estate on the north side of Chicago, LA, a few other things. So I go through this, give you the fake routing number. You transfer it into a bank that you think is even in your own state. It sits there overnight for 24 hours. The bank gets a nice fee, because it's a large amount of money, and they get a percentage of that wire transfer, right? They have no obligation to report, because guess where the money went? To another bank in another state in the United States. So I created a daisy chain of fake LLCs, and then finally it goes out, because the last one, and a lot of these, had a Mexican name associated with them. And they went to a bank from a franchised bank out of Canada in Mexico City, and from there to Eastern Europe. One after another did this. The only bank that was required to report is the last one that left the country, but by the time they even told law enforcement, if they got over their embarrassment or even knew about it, it was already gone. Well, here's the other problem too. A lot of these large dealerships in California, Florida, Connecticut, New York, that were buying these luxury homes and yachts didn't want the FBI looking around their finances either. So, and these guys knew it, and they never reported. We got called in because the so-and-so CEO of so-and-so said, hey, you gotta help these guys out. We started tracing these things, and we found all the patterns. Almost, I think it was, a friend of mine in the Secret Service in Texas told me they think we lost, our country lost over $900 million to Eastern Europe that actually helped fund the foreign war and reimburse oligarchs and various entities that had their properties confiscated. So that's one that you will never see reported. Never, I've looked everywhere, it's never been there. So another one that we don't see reported, and I kept on saying this, is master service providers. Now, I know a lot of good people who work for these, but they're also using software that's usually not built by them, and they're a franchise, and a lot of the call centers are not in this country. We started seeing this back in 2016. Every one of them has not been reported. And the new version of SolarWinds that was not fixed and is based out of Canada that we refuse to work with is also tied and been tied to Iranian hackers now. Those are never reported. A, because the company that needs to report it is responsible, once they report it, of doing third-party validation. They don't want to be on the hook. The lawyers go, don't do it. It doesn't get reported. And the last one doesn't get reported is internal misconfigurations. So, and the funny thing about the internal misconfigurations is that almost all but 3 in the past 2 years for us has shown up in another type of event that was reported. So it's kind of on the balance there for not being reported. But I'm talking about misconfiguration of firewalls, misconfiguration of a public, let's say, website that is accepting loans, educational institutions, things like that. No, I'm not talking about MOVEit, which was not a 0 day for any of you who know anything about MOVEit. But so they don't get reported because the company doesn't want to have an investigation. They don't want to have to tell their cyber insurance, who's going to drop them in a heartbeat or double the rates to get money back from the investigation. So, by the way, are there any questions? Am I telling you something you haven't heard or don't really know? I am? Okay. And unfortunately, you know, in incident response, what happens to us, and how many of you in here are incident responders? Okay, one, couple. Have you ever been in a situation where you come in and you talk to the company and you say, we really need to look here, and they say, nope, this is the only place we found it, this is the only place you're gonna look. And that happens a lot too. So we also testify a lot. I do. I'm going to be deposed 3 or 4 times more this summer, both for, in general as an expert in court, but also as part of class action lawsuits. So they need somebody who's a technical expert who can explain to the judge, who can put in an expert report exactly how this time a hack worked. And every so often, we're always trying to do, okay, this could have happened, but we weren't allowed to look here. Or the symptom that came up is the only thing that they actually filed on, or the regulatory agency filed on, because when you notice you have been compromised is usually not the actual initial IOC or incident of compromise that happened. Matter of fact, it's rarely the incident of compromise happened. If you know anything about my bio, we did Equifax, Marriott, Yahoo, the Facebook token breach, Cambridge Analytica, a whole bunch of those. And 3/4 of the stuff that we've learned in that, I could never say in public. I will be under a protective order or under seal for the rest of my life. Okay? But I can tell you beyond a reasonable doubt that when I read the newspaper now and I see when they do report, yeah, that's not it. That's the symptom. It's sort of like saying you have a cold, but you also have a tumor, but I saw you sneeze. That's really what goes into the news. And that's why it's so important that when you see a Verizon data breach report, an AT&T data breach report, those numbers are probably 1/10 of what's really out there, because they can really only legitimate report on what has been reported. So let me go back to how I got into this type of business. Which was by happenstance, by the way. I happen to be one that's annoying and raises my hand a lot and asks a lot of questions. So I was working multiple jobs. I was actually mowing the lawn for the head of the Young Lawyers Association at Chicago, and I said, you know, I can't really mow your lawn in the winter, and I really do need the money, so is there any way I can get out of high school, take the train, and go downtown and answer phones for you after work? And he says, yeah, sure. I mean, we got lots of need. He worked at 29 South LaSalle, which is the original location of the Chicago Bar Association. So I went down there and I started answering phones. And I was in computer science, information systems, math, and a few other things in college. And these guys came in and we're going to automate the RESPA system, the Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act system, for Attorney's Title, which was a company that was actually located in there. Was a whole bunch of attorneys that did nothing but real estate law. And at the same time, they were the ones that were asked to just cursory, at an hourly rate, look over this code for this insider trading. So I said, I will do this for free. I just want to see what you guys are doing. So sometimes I didn't get back to my apartment until midnight or later, sometimes not at all. I actually slept in there. And a little bit of trivia, Rod Blagojevich, the former and now imprisoned, I'm not sure, is he out yet? Is anybody, he's out? Oh God. Same hairdo back then, was a law clerk. He was going to DePaul Law School at the time. So a little brush with unfortunate fame. So I was, they asked me anyways, just take a look at this. Like I said, it was a COBOL code behind the Chicago Board of Exchanges system to adjudicate buys and sells for stocks, mostly on the futures market, because they had a different program that worked on the non-futures market. So a whole bunch of green bar sheets written in COBOL, hitting back to an old DB2 database on what we call a CICS system, CICS. Are you familiar with that? Really old. Lawyers didn't know anything about it. These guys that were coming in and coding this stuff for RESPA were doing it on on what was one of the first VM systems in a scripting language called REX. They had never done COBOL before. So here I am, the old-time Fortran, COBOL assembler, all that kind of stuff, and I start looking through this. And I said, I got to find out how this actually works. I've never been in the Chicago Board of Exchange before. So I signed up for a tour at the CBOE, which is about 6 or 7 blocks down the street, LaSalle, between LaSalle and Washington in downtown Chicago, and I took a tour. And I'm walking around and I'm asking some pretty weird questions because, of course, I'm thinking in terms of how this code is working. And in the old days, just if you ever saw Trading Places with Eddie Murphy and all that, you had the big pit and the line of old VDT computers, just the dumb terminals with the large clunky keyboards, all hooked up at the base of these large towers. And I'm watching, and there's pay phones and phones up above that with guys that were on the phone with the brokerage firms, and they'd have a pit runner with them, and the pit runner, they would give them the order to buy or sell, and the guy would have to run as fast as they could down to the guy on the floor, and the guy on the floor would take a look at it, make sure nothing had changed, and run to these guys at the base and hand them the order. Usually the pit runner would also do that. The other guys would stand out there and negotiate and do their job or whatever. And I thought, this is weird. So there's this whole time delay, and then they have to manually enter it. And I'm looking at the code where they manually enter it. And somewhere along the line, some genius at about 3 or 4 brokerage firms figured out that if I pay the guy entering the buy or sell order at the base of that pit to not hit enter 3 times, because sure enough, COBOL code, if you guys are familiar with this top-down code, the first time they enter it, they only enter it into the transaction or ODS portion of DB2 and CICS. So it goes into the transactional. You have to enter twice in order to force it to commit to the full database, and 3 times enter, 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 probably about 3 seconds apart too, because these are old, slow systems. Then it actually showed up on the big screen above and was constantly on this analog teletype to all these brokerage firms, giving them what they thought were really live, up-to-date stuff. So if I got the guy to only enter it once or twice, I could change the price without anyone else knowing it. So all the orders that they would be sending down to a certain extent would never actually get adjudicated or realized because the price had already changed. So 3 or 4 brokerage firms, not knowing anything about technology, just realized the timing of this thing. And I'm thinking, I'm going to be in the newspaper. Holy God, I just blew this case wide open. Well, I was a peon. Nobody was going to put my name on an expert report, that's for sure. I'm a volunteer. So I tell the guys this, and I realize, and this is what also convinced me not to go to law school, is that the lawyers were then going to be billing for all the discovery they were going to be doing to the brokerage firms. They were going to hire their own spies in there to like get as much evidence as possible, and that they were going to get paid by the hour to get these bankers box full of discovery docs from each of the brokerage firms, and they had all budgeted. They were going to make about a year's salary out of all of this, so there's no way they were going to solve this case early. And I'm thinking, wow, this is dumb. But more importantly, as I'm watching the Chicago Tribune and the Chicago Sun-Times, and I'm graduating from college, and I'm probably not going to be working full-time there, and I started in law school on a scholarship on the CBA because they could cherry pick a few kids. I was broke, I couldn't afford it, so that's the only way I was going to get in. And I just had this sick feeling in my stomach. I never wanted to be a lawyer. I did marry a lawyer, and I tell him law jokes all the time, a lawyer jokes all the time, which I think he kind of appreciates now, but I'm not sure. I just don't stop. And our marriage is still strong, so I don't know if he just turned me off or what. But for the first year I was in law school, that's all I could think about is how this was all a joke while you're going in there to do something good or whatever. But then it realized to me is that if they announced this, okay, prematurely, it could cause some problems, but also they had a motivation not to announce. And that motivation is the same one that is today. So whereas I know that the lawyers get involved in some of these organizations to not actually announce what they should announce or report what they should report, and it's all of our data, our systems, and even our IP that's at risk, okay? They are also informed some of the time, not all of the time, that if we announce and everyone finds out what the scheme is by some of these attackers, they're just going to change their attack motivation and direction, and then we're going to be starting from scratch trying to figure out what's going on. Now, I buy that some of it, but I don't buy it all. I know that the lawyer's job is to protect the company. But in this case, in the SEC, they didn't want it out because they wanted these guys to do it. They wanted to figure out how many brokerage firms, and I was not mature enough at that time to understand that. So I'm not going to totally demonize people that don't report, but that really got me thinking that it's not the technology, it's the psychology behind it. Anybody can learn to code, but when we start seeing nation states and more sophisticated APTs now paying ransomware groups or even fake ransomware groups to do nothing but cover their tracks, knowing how our systems work, knowing there's a motivation from the organizations to only look a centimeter deep underneath the water, because that way they don't have to report, they can stay solvent, they don't have to pay a whole bunch of attorneys, they don't go through all that. The end result is, of course, they're never finding the true cause, and most of these companies do get hit repeatedly. It really, it's not a technical game. So I could go through a whole presentation of how we just decrypted this and how this was happening and this new malware we found. And by the way, this other firm on Ramp just the other day sold the RaaS software off publicly, but left the company name that they were attacking, the domain, the ports, the systems, the hardened passwords in there because they didn't care and they just needed to get rid of the software. That stuff happens all the time, and that company did not report, and they're not a client of ours. So all we could do is hand that information over to the FBI. But that happens all the time. So what you see in the news, usually it's somewhat truthful, but it's kind of like going to the National Enquirer with some of them, right? There's a modicum of truth in there. They have no motivation to say the truth, and nor do they sometimes want to give it away. The other thing is that when you do, in your organizations and when you do research, realize that ransomware is the end game. A lot of the stuff, when somebody becomes noisy enough, when you catch them, that is the end game. It is not where the initial attack occurred. It is, matter of fact, in our experience, it has never been when their initial attack occurred. So again, I couldn't mention company names or anything like that, but I'd like to open it up to some questions. And I always have stories, so depending on what you ask, I can always tell you a story about something and change the names.
Yeah.
Yes?
So once the money leaves and goes overseas to Eastern Europe, you said, it's untraceable at that point, but you have to figure
Well, we have no jurisdiction, but also you got to understand that these guys have no motivation to hide either, because we have no jurisdiction there.
So if you wanted to get into this business, how would you get the money back to the U.S. if you were a U.S. citizen?
You don't. And let me just put a plug in. I have been working with state and federal legislators for a long time to make the process of actually getting a bank account for businesses 10 times harder, not because I don't want businesses, but because that means that the mule that went in and opened up the account, or the data that, because when you get identity theft insurance, okay, and you give your social security number or something to a Secretary of State, not all of them require it, and you get a tax ID in return, okay? You're using the social security number, but because a financial transaction is not occurring on that number, you're not getting a loan or anything like that. I don't care how much identity theft insurance you have, they're never going to notify you. You don't know. So Truist Bank was in the news. I can talk about this. That's not my, we're not investigating it, but I know enough about what's going on in the background. They've been in the news. Truist Bank is one of the banks that has fallen victim to this for a while. And in a good way and a bad way, they did start to do some back-end investigations and find that they are one of those hops. They're a popular hop along this wire fraud pathway. And again, if we make the same rules for getting a consumer account as a business account, they're going to have to find another way to get the wires out of the wire fraud. We're actually going to stop using the business LLCs as wire fraud. And that's, so I've already submitted it, and it has to start at the state. So I've already submitted it in Minnesota, I've submitted it in New York, I've submitted it in New Jersey, I've submitted it in Florida. And I'm going to continue to fight for this because we are funding a lot of illegal activities. And just so you know, some of it is actually global sex trafficking too that is being funded by this. So, and that's one of the things that we do on the side. In my business, we volunteer to do different types of online nefarious activity to protect vulnerable people. We don't get paid for that, we volunteer for it. And by the way, there are tons of organizations online that you could use your skills for good in that way too, and just be prepared that you're gonna see a lot of ugly stuff. You know, we saw, for instance, we saw where the money was going and tracing illegal organs. I know that sounds gross, but apparently in some of the Uyghur camps in China, when they do imprison people, they're basically disemboweling them live because they don't want to pay anesthesia, and they're using the organs for tissue on the tissue market and organ market, which is apparently a very lucrative market. So yeah, that's kidneys, eyeballs, you name it. And that was a shocker that I did not know about when I started volunteering for tracing some of this. And so you get on different channels, darknet stuff, etc. You can read the code, you can see what's going on, and then you start to get an identity and all that and get trusted, and then you see even more. But we came across this one because of something that happened here in the United States, and they were trying to look for volunteers to trace it, and that was scary. Kept me up a few nights, that's for sure. Yes? So he's asking if the bank accounts that are being used for wire fraud are single use. Thank you for asking that, because I left that out. Yes, they are. And that's another red flag that banks should be notifying, that should be saying, hey, this guy opened it up for 2 weeks, and then it shut down, and all the money was gone. And 99% of the time, they open up the business banks with only $100 or a couple $100. And sometimes they use human mules for it also. So these guys are, they're regular, you know, mom and pop people. They don't know, they take this online job at home, and they say, hey, all I want you to do is take this money and put it in this account physically, so we can get it in the account, because we've got no way to wire into it right now without leaving a trace. So they do use human mules for that, and what we see is the bank account shut down within a couple of days after the last dime leaves. Any other questions? Yes?
So that sounds like something happened to my friend where he tried to sell someone and it was fictitious person.
Yes. Yes, so she said that's happened to her friend. You'll find this on a lot of dating apps also, where they're asking you to, they know you really well, they've developed a relationship over a year, and oh, by the way, do this. But those are one-off. The wire fraud that I was referring to is a little bit more organized, and it became a thing, and it was huge for about 2 years. Now we're starting to see it die down, but the process that they use is now being used by a lot of other types of scams because it works so darn well, and they're taking advantage of our own bank deregulation. Yeah, they should, but business, there's pros and cons, right? So I own a business. I own 2 of them. They're both cyber forensic and investigative services, et cetera. I want easy banking. But where do you draw the line? Where's the threshold between easy and getting defrauded? Now, if any of you do have a business of your own, you may have noticed that a lot of them, to avoid getting sued for this type of wire fraud, instead of putting the money into helping this situation, you may have gotten a letter in the mail that changed your terms to say that you have to go through commercial arbitration if you have an issue with where your money went, which means that you're never going to recover your legal fees. And a lot of companies this has this to do not report because they're embarrassed. And again, they were focusing on people with a lot of money who did not want law enforcement digging around in their finances. Because the first thing that was going to happen was the banks were going to come back and say, your computer was hacked, it wasn't us. And so they have to spend the money. And by the way, we were getting a lot of calls on that because we're pretty well connected in some of the areas, and so we were getting these clandestine calls going, hey, just see if we're good, because I don't want this happening again, and I don't know if I want to press charges. We don't want a lot of attention that we just bought 3 yachts from, Italy or something like that. There's a lot of different nuances to this, but the bottom line is the money's leaving our country. It's a national security issue, and it's funding nefarious activities, bottom line. So, yes? Well, a lot of them go into crypto mixers, but it depends. We'll see the crypto mixers on the extortion piece. And a good point. So he asked about where the money goes and if it goes into, let's say, your typical BTC, Monero, et cetera. It's funny on the ransomware, a small piece of that companies will pay right away because they think it's going to keep their data clean, when in reality their data was gone a long time ago, because ransomware is the end of the game. It is not the beginning of the game. If somebody can get into your organization, traverse the entire network, and something as large as what we've seen in the Fortune 10 companies that have been hit, guess what? They already know a lot about you, and usually the data's gone. That's the first thing. But the second thing is that a year or 2 ago, and I can't say names of which companies you see in the news or where this happened, they were already hit once, and they paid. And they pay into a crypto mixer, so you can't just trace the wallet as easily. And crypto mixers have been around for the past 4 or 5 years, and they were developed purposely to avoid the tracing of the wallet, because we all heard about a couple of them where they got the money back. Well, you're not going to get your money back out of a mixer. But they also don't report when they pay it, thinking, I paid, now I don't have to report. And what also happens in those is there's a couple of companies that specialize in negotiating with ransomware, which I do not ever condone. But that's my personal opinion. I know some organizations are in a hot spot and they really think they're going to get their key back or something like that. but they pay, and we. So I can say this, I believe, because I think this matter was closed a while ago, and it was somewhat reported. But we actually had an extremely large, multi-billion-dollar company walking into a private hearing and producing in evidence a certificate of destruction from a hacker. You can't make that up. And the lawyers go, see, nothing was taken. And, you know, what do you, I mean, the judge is looking at it going, oh, okay. I'm like, oh, you know, face palm. But so they never reported, and this happened a couple years ago before they got hit again, and it did end up on a leak site. They knew it had happened, and they didn't report until the leak site made the news. So it made Bleeping Computer, Krebs Online, all that kind of stuff. And all of a sudden, yeah, we're investigating. We didn't want to go live because we wanted to keep this under wraps in order to, you know, make sure we could catch the bad guys. So yes, but when they do pay, almost all of them go through some form of mixers. Because of the volatility in actual virtual money now, we're seeing the preferred currency to be euro or dollar. And so when they pay in dollar, sometimes they distribute the money over stolen Cash App accounts, PayPal accounts, Zelle is a big one. So we see that a lot where they're distributing the funds, so it makes it harder for you to actually trace the money. And again, they will jump through bank and account and account and account, and by the time our law enforcement, when they do report, catches up with it, it's gone. And it's gone into countries that we have no jurisdiction. And it goes into, you know, African nations, it goes into Southeast Asian nations, goes into various former Soviet Union states, goes into a few banks in Vienna and Switzerland. Vienna's a hot spot, Abu Dhabi. We can trace it there, and after that it's gone. But also they're using names and identities that are not even real. Some of them are virtual babies too. So in the past 20 or plus years, there's nation states that are actually, you know, propagating virtual people, which really became an issue during COVID, because what we found, and this is no slam, well, it kind of is, because I don't like MSPs, but I know a lot of good people work for them, and MSSPs. But they were hiring people online, and some of those people never physically existed. They were never bone and flesh. And then they would get full admin rights into multiple companies, and a couple of celebrities for that matter, and take off with all the data and money. And a lot of those don't get reported. You'd be surprised how many plastic surgeons get broken into of celebrities, and they don't want to report it because they don't want to add notoriety to what they did and how much money they paid. They don't want their images out there and stuff like that. So it's just kind of a trickle down everywhere you go. But those never get reported. Any other questions? Yes?
I mean, people are just guessing if people do pay the ransomware, how much good it actually ever does, or accomplishes anything for them?
Well, you know, there is an unwritten code with some of the more, you know, you know, you're dealing with criminals to begin with, but they have a motivation to keep the money coming in. So it's not like in a lot of ransomware groups, they're lazy. They buy the code. They buy the access. Keep that in mind. Matter of fact, the majority of them that we know of and that we've followed, and we've been involved with different threat intelligence groups and stuff like that, they're just lazy. That's all the way to explain it. They want quick in and out. They're financially motivated. They're either going to get paid by somebody to brick somebody and to make their lives miserable, or to have some sort of hacktivism event where they're making fun of them, or they want to get in and just grab enough to embarrass you and to make it look like everything was gone. But when they're moving that fast, they're not exfiltrating at the same time, and that's what we found the majority of the time. Not all. There's always exceptions to the rule. But when they do get paid, there's an unwritten rule, you know, there is a little bit of honor among thieves in which they're going to try to hide it. And and that doesn't mean your data isn't out there on some Tox channel being sold back and forth, going into various other embellishers and other large models and stuff like that, and being mined and used for other purposes. It just means that they're not going to be really obvious about it for 2 years on average. Okay? And that's been the threshold that we've seen. 2 years later, the data starts coming up and being sold in markets. And markets, in our opinion, and this is, and again, I've never done an empirical study, so this is just what I've seen, what my team has seen. Markets are like flea markets. When law enforcement brags about shutting down these markets, think of it as, I'm managing a flea market, but you have your own goods. You have your own table, like tables are set out here, right? And they're picking up their tables, they're moving to another market. But the goods that they're selling are goods that they bought from somebody else and they're reselling it, right? Some of them are good, some of them are bad. They don't care, they're there to make a buck, and they're middlemen in a lot of them. And so they bought, and they're selling, and they're trying to make a margin. And they know that virtually they can sell many, many times. Some of them will put on there, I guarantee I'm only going to sell your data once, and all they do is they sell it once and wait a while, and then it comes back up. And because they want to keep their reputation up. But there is no glory in shutting down some of these markets. They just open up another one. Everyone knows the story of Genesis Market, Hydra, stuff like that, where the same vendors showed up under another name, another alias, in another market selling the exact same stuff. So all they do is just make sure that the market that they are selling into is not a sample that you can see. So if I just query a threat intelligence tool, I'm probably not going to see all your stuff. They're only going to show stuff that is going to give them a slight bit of credibility in order to make a sale, but the rest of it stays underneath. I worked on the Equifax case. I know a lot about the Equifax case. It was sealed. And one of the issues that came up that is public, that was in the Washington Post, was we're not seeing this data anywhere. Supreme Court of Georgia makes their final decision. 2 weeks later, everyone out there is advertising, I got this data from Equifax. I mean, and it took a while for that to go through Congress and court and all the hearings and the expert reports and the declarations and the, injunctive relief motions and all that kind of stuff. And 2 weeks to the day, it started showing up. And they were not just advertising it, they're showing pictures of employees and the cover of the building and their ads online on the dark net, that sort of thing. That's what we normally see. And those are the ones that we have been involved in. Yes?
Sounds like you have a pretty good handle on them. You deal with an awful lot of bad actors 24/7. And I'm curious about how you handle the consequences for yourself of dealing with those events and people so continuously, because it can erode one's solidity.
Yeah.
What do you do for self-care?
You know,
Enables you to keep doing this work in a long-distance run rather than a sprint.
Yeah. So Richard asked how we handle dealing with all this. And that's an excellent question, because if I was going to show the PowerPoint presentation that kind of got destroyed by council reviewing it, you would have seen pictures of me on the front, because I don't really like professional pictures and all that. You would have seen me on a horse. There's been, to be honest, we've seen a lot of bad stuff. And a lot of stuff we know is going on that we can't say. And to my team's credit and my partner's credit in our business, we have gotten up and walked out of clients. We have fired clients because we just don't want our name associated with them. And some of them are pretty big companies, but they're not the whole company. I'm not going to demonize everybody. There's pockets of of bad cultures in various organizations. But interestingly enough, even when I leave here tonight, after I go to another graduation party for somebody that went to high school in my area, and their parents' party, I'm going to head out to the stables, and I have sport horses. And you're shaking your head, yes. And they're not timid sport horses. They're ex-race horses. Some of them I've rescued, and they're all high-strung. And quite frankly, if I'm thinking about anything from work, I will get turned to a human slingshot, and you will see me here in a body cast. So I've had that happen. I've broken a lot of bones, and I've learned my lesson when I'm there. That is my catharsis. And I go there on purpose, and I engage in stupid stuff like jumping immovable objects with a body vest and a sign on my arm and shows that says who my doctor is, and wear the tall boots in case I break my leg. The boots hold the leg in. But I can't, and I've done it. I've been very upset and gone to the stables and then had the horse spook because he knows I'm not mentally there, and I go off. And I'm not talking small horses. My one is 17.2 hands high, another one is 16.3, and those are the ones that I'm riding. I got a couple of others that are retired, but that's what I do. And then I rescue dogs. So again, you have to be there. And so last night, if you saw the storms, I had a 103-pound Anatolian Shepherd Great Pyrenees mix on me, grabbing for dear life because of the thunder, lightning, and rain and all that. So not a lot of sleep, but that's a good thing. I appreciate that. But that's what I do. And a lot of our team just disappears for a couple days at a time because we have to. We see a lot. And it's not just, you think you can disassociate yourself. The dark net is a dark place, but it's also a place where a lot of good people go to stay anonymous. What bugs us is a part of our business is forensics, and it's pure forensics. So we go into organizations and we do, let's say, employment stuff where somebody was involuntarily terminated, or somebody said that so-and-so left our company and they took all of our secrets, and we want you to forensically analyze their devices and get all the logs, et cetera, find out if they used a thumb drive, So we use our forensic tools and we do the typical thing. But when we go in there, there's a lot of times we find people in the organization that are doing nefarious things, like going into illegal porn and sex trafficking, and maybe even doing some other things. And these sometimes are executives, and we can't say anything. The only thing we can do is report the data to the counsel, usually that hires us, because almost everything we do is under attorney-client privilege, and sit there and wait. And we have to sit in rooms with the same people. We just saw stuff, and it's not what's being litigated, so we can only talk about something, but we know it. And those are secrets we hold. And in one case, I actually had to run into this person at a religious event for children at a petting zoo. This guy was starting this on the side with kids, and I left the client. And this was years ago, but I left the client, I left everything. I'm just like, I can't do this anymore. This makes me sick, and I gotta keep my mouth shut, otherwise I'm the one who ends up in jail and not that person. So it's not easy. And we've seen, like with the Oregon thing, we saw pictures that you'd have nightmares on for years, and a lot of them. So it does happen, but thanks for asking. And I think all of you in this area, when you're doing this type of work for good, is going to run across this stuff. And realize that you're a lot better off having self-care and still fighting the good fight than doing something that's going to get you taken out of the pool of fighting the good fight. Realize that eventually this stuff does come around. Any other questions?
Well, I was wondering what organizations you think you belong to.
I can, if you give me your card later, I can send you a list. There's several of them, and a couple of them are private, where you've got to know somebody. But I'd be more than happy to send you a list. It's actually very rewarding, especially when you're working for a lot of corporations and class action attorneys and stuff like that, to actually use your skills to do this. Even though it can be hard what you find, it's just rewarding. So anyway, so if you take anything from this presentation, please know that what you read in the news is just the tip of the iceberg, or sometimes even an obfuscated version of that iceberg. There's a lot more going on, so don't just accept that, stay curious. Also, that the majority of things that actually determine the pattern of threat actors are not reported for a variety of reasons, but they're not reported. You're not going to see them in your data breach reports and the numbers being represented there. You may see a little bit of that in the threat intelligence of companies that come in and actually analyze threats, but most of them you don't. And very few, 67%, I counted, that I did do my own empirical study of, and 67% of the incidents that we're involved in or other parts of it are never reported, ever. And that is, you know, something that is good and bad depending on the motivation of who's deciding not to report, which is usually the attorneys. So, any other questions, comments? No? Okay, well, I'll leave you the rest of the hour back. Thank you.